Educated Colin Snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you to marvel snap. Your skills will be improving. How you doing? You'll hit infinity and won't go back. Educated Colin Snap.
Well, that was amazing. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for that. That was the John Whites. Definitely post a link to his channel. Make sure to check him out. And really appreciate someone making a theme song. I really appreciate that. Take care of yourselves. Let's go on to the video. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Educated Colin Snap channel. How you doing? So, once again, we're going to be talking about how to deal with Shuri Zero. I do have a deck breakdown for it, so it's kind of weird. Like, hey, now here, defeat it. But it's definitely one of the two problem decks in the metagame right now. A lot of people are talking about it. We're kind of hoping for a patch to kind of address some of these concerns. But for now, I just wanted to have some thoughts about what are some of the problems of Shuri and then some of the potential answers. I will say first off, disclaimer, there is no easy answer currently. So these are tier 1 decks. They're very strong, very consistent. If there was a good, reliable, cheap, and safe counter, you would already know about it. It would be very played. It would be talked about. You'd be like, oh, Shuri, yeah, it's good, but you can just play this and you win. That isn't really the case, and we're going to talk about that. Well, right now. We're going to talk about it right now. So first things off, let's talk about some of the problem cards. I would say, of course, Shuri itself is one of the problem cards in the Shuri deck. It's 4 mana, or 4 energy, 2 power base, right? So it gives you power, but then it creates uncontestable minions, right? So you're taking the power of the next card you play and doubling it. So it's like you're creating 2 copies of the next card you're playing in terms of power acquisition, right? And that's very strong, right? Even if this had like 0 power and it's like double the next card you play, or like create 2 copies of the next card you play, you're creating 2 5-drops or potentially 2 6-drops. And that's really cool. So this just has a lot of power in the card. And because it has that innate power, it's very flexible. You can play this in a lot of decks and it has a lot of synergies. So the card in itself just has that safety of like, hey, I like having double 5-drops. I like having double 6-drops. And it's not really, the downside isn't really there if you play this card correctly, right? Like there are some downsides, but if played correctly, it's hard to really abuse some of the downsides that Shuri is presented with. So next problem card, we're going to talk about Red Skull. Right, 15 base power is hard to deal with. This base power is a lot higher than some 6-drops, or most 6-drops. This base power is so high, and it just fits into what Shuri wants to do. You want to take the base power of a card, make it huge. You go from 15 to 30. There's nothing that does 30 by itself. And I want to say that the downside of the card is actually not that bad. Like it's actually not too bad of a card. A lot of the times you're going to be playing Red Skull into maybe 1 minion, maybe 2 minions, and then you're forcing them to play into that lane if they want to contest or take advantage of the downside. And usually you have 30 power. That's so much effort they have to put into that Red Skull lane to counteract the upside of 15 base power. And even if they do fully commit, you're only losing 8 power base. So you go down to 22, which is very strong. Even without the Shuri buff, you go down to 7, which is not that bad if the ability makes your opponent play 4 cards into that lane, right? It's not that bad of a downside. So the downside isn't bad. And then there are some scenarios where the downside's good, where you can mess with Cerebro, I guess, is like the main thing, where you're like, ooh, I can't play Cerebro decks right now at all because Red Skull insta wins. And having a downside where, like, in some cases you just insta win a matchup is like, is that okay? I don't know. Cerebral decks are quite fun, and just being limited and playing it because this card is so popular just feels a little weird to me. So I don't necessarily know how they're going to adjust this. Once again, I'm not really talking about how I would change the card. I just want to kind of talk about some of the problematic pieces of the deck and then how to maybe address some of these things. Next up, we have She-Hulk. So She-Hulk, I think, ends up being a problem in this deck because you get to take advantage of the Shuri buff and combine it with other cards. So you get to play this 20 power card, 1 energy, and you can combine that easily with Taskmaster to create 2 20 power cards, or you can combine it with Aero to create a 27 card. That's our 27 power turn, which is really powerful. You usually have Sunspot on the board, so skipping that turn 5 doesn't really cost you that much in terms of a downside. And you get this huge swing on the final turn that's really hard to deal with. You could even argue like She-Hulk Sunspot is, interesting, but I think it's okay. It's just a combination of the Shuri buffed She-Hulk combo that really makes the She-Hulk become more of a problem. So something to think about. And then Taskmaster, right? This card copies the power of the Shuri buff card, so you really get to double dip on what Shuri provides. Usually Shuri's just saying, buff the next card you play. But with Taskmaster, you're like, buff the next card and the card after you play. Same thing with Zola, but Zola has its own issues that I wouldn't say is really a problem card. But Taskmaster really just does well, following up with the Red Skull, following up with the She-Hulk. You just get these huge Shuri buffed card values, which are just hard for regular decks to deal with. So what to do about it? Not particularly sure. We'll see what Second Dinner comes up with. And then we have Aero. So Aero's, once again, this is like the same text. Aero's already a very strong card, but when you combine it with a very strong deck, it exacerbates the problem. You have a strong card that fits into every deck, and then Aero just says, yeah, I win here. I have priority, I win here. You don't have priority, that's sad for you. I guess you have to lose. I guess you have no options because my Aero will shut you down. Hopefully you're playing Dr. Doom or something. But yeah, Aero definitely a strong card. Very hard to deal with if you lose priority, right? You just get to lock people out of the game, basically. And then the last problem card I would say in Shuri decks is the Armor Cosmo. So normally with a deck like Shuri, the clear answer is like you're summoning huge stat cards. Let's destroy those cards, right? But because of Armor, because of Cosmo, most destroy effects are on reveal, right? There's no like ongoing destroy a card at the end of the turn or some weird thing. Most cards are on reveal, so if they play the Cosmo down, there's no way to like destroy on another lane as well, right? Like this card destroys the highest card to the right of you. Like there's no card like that. So as long as you're playing the Cosmo in the proper lane, the Armor in the proper lane, it's so hard to deal with these big minions that people play. So it just protects a lot of the downside of playing huge stat minions. And there's not there's not other really elegant ways of dealing with huge statted minions besides destroying them with Shang-Chi. That's the most common answer, and some of the other answers are just not as elegant or easy to access, etc., etc. But regardless, let's talk about some of the potential answers to this deck list. First things off, we've got the Shang-Chi, we've already talked about this, and the Valkyrie. So this lets you destroy or neutralize the Shuri targets and also the generally big unit played. The big units that are played. So the problem with this, right, is the Armor Cosmo you just talked about. If they Armor Cosmo you, you can't Shang-Chi anymore. You can't Valkyrie really if they Cosmo you. You can do it if they armor you, but you're still losing a lot of that counterplay there. And it's weird that it's good deck design that the counters to the answers are already built into that deck, but it feels weird that you're playing a deck and you're like, okay, I want to counter this, and then you're like, oh wait, they countered my counter. All right, I got nothing. Okay, it's time to move on, right? Like, and that just feels very weird in terms of giving players tools to answer different deck lists. If the tools to answer them come already countered in the deck, then there's it's not a tool. So something needs to be done about that. Make it harder for them to easily slot in all these efficient counters, and also like Armor Cosmo counters like everything in the game. Like that's already a problem. In that there's no way to get around armor preventing destroys. Like there's no like remove from the game or anything. Anyway, where the text is different, so armor doesn't always counter it or prevent destruction. Right? There's no real elegant way to get around this armor Cosmo problem currently. So hopefully something can be done like that. More tools to deal with them playing armor Cosmos added in the game, then it'll feel better. But right now, that's not really the case. Next up, we have the Killmonger Electra spin. So this destroys Sunspot. Sunspot's a very common card. Zero is also a very common card. Sometimes Titania, Ebony Maw, these cards can also be pretty common. So it does destroy the Sunspot, does destroy the Zero, and sometimes the Zero buffed units. So that's one way of doing it. It's not the biggest deal because even if you destroy the Sunspot and all that stuff, they can still just beat you with Shuri, Red Skull, Taskmaster, and that's it, right? And they still beat you. So this isn't like the best solution, but it can make it annoying for them. If you kill their Sunspot, well, maybe they don't really want to do nothing and just play the She-Hulk, or maybe you now have priority and now you can do Aero with priority. Speaking of, one of the answers is a card that they also play. If you have priority and you play Aero, you can mess them up, right? You can move their Taskmaster into the same lane. You can move their She-Hulk into the same lane. You can make their moves more telegraphed or easier to counter if you can put everything in one lane or everything in a lane they don't want to play in. So this can make the last turn plays for the Shuri player awkward, but you do need priority. If they have priority, they'll do this to you. So you have to make sure that your early game is tight and strong so that you can be the one erroring them. So that's the one caveat there. Same thing with priority. Another way is to use Cosmo with priority. This is a lot harder to do. You kind of have to be in the head of the opponent and knowing exactly where they want to play particular cards. Sometimes locations can make it easier to know, oh, they want to play their Shuri here, blah, blah, blah. But if you have priority turn 4, you can play Cosmo before they play their Shuri, deny their Shuri. It can also mess up their late game plays like Taskmaster, Aero, Arnim Zola. All these on reveal cards you can try to deny it with the Cosmo. Once again, you do need priority. That's maybe the hardest part, especially for Cosmo, to get. So you do have to be careful with this. That's why these answers aren't cut and paste, always work, You still have to fight for the board. You still have to work at it, outplay them, and then even if you do all that, you're not even guaranteed the win. So it's a tough setup, but these are tier 1 decks, so it's hard to have like an easy answer here. The next one, we have Shadow King. I don't really like this answer too much, but it can work. And another thing is Shadow King is a expensive card, and I wouldn't even say it's that good because you still have to play other non-Shuri decks. Even though you can revert the buffs of Shuri and Taskmaster, Red Skull's still going to have 15 base power, so you're still going to have to put more than that 4 energy that you're playing into Shadow King. You're still going to have to put more than that to contest that Red Skull, but Taskmaster could be a good answer. If they Taskmaster you, then you Shadow King, and then it goes down to 0. Like, that is pretty good, but a lot of the other potential uses of Shadow King don't really show up that well, and I'm not a big fan of the card. I'm super biased. I think this card is not that good, but it is an answer. But right now, it's just like too rare to really recommend. But even when it gets more cheap or more accessible, I still don't know if I would really recommend this particular card. And then last but not least, same final recommendation, if you can't beat the mirror, right, you can just join up. You can just play Shuri yourself. And once again, the benefits of doing that is you get to see what some of the pitfalls of the deck are. You get to see, oh, Shuri players actually struggle into this location. Shuri players actually struggle into this matchup. Blah, blah, blah. You start learning what is problems for the deck list. And even if you don't play a deck list afterwards, you start understanding what they're looking for, what they're trying to play around. And it gives you a better understanding of how to attack the matchup. So those are my thoughts on Shuri. Obviously, the takeaway, once again, this is a very strong deck. The counters, I would say, are a lot harder to work with. They're not as unbeatable as Thanos, where Thanos Leech kind of really ruins a lot of the counterplay. Here, you have to worry about Armor and Cosmo, but there are still other things you can do. You could maybe try Polarising the Cosmo or something like that. Like that's the type of ideas you could try going for. But overall, they're good decks. But hopefully, Secondary does do something about it. I just wanted to put some videos out talking about it, some of the ways you can deal with the scenario, since it's such a common thing that people are talking about right now. Hope you guys enjoy it, and I'll see you in the next one.